Adaptive security architecture is the future. We appreciate your joining this afternoon or this morning, depending upon your time zone. Um, in your menu, you'll see a questions bar. Uh, you can, during the course of the presentation, we can take questions and we'll either answer them at the end or we'll answer them real time back to you using the response in the window. So feel free to ask questions. We'll be going through the presentation and then we will have a Q&A at the end of this. So I'd now like to introduce our two speakers. We have Avi Chesla, who is our CEO and founder of Empower Cybersecurity. And we have Anthony Farrow, who is our Senior Director of Security Solutions Architecture. So with that, let me turn it over to Avi and we can get started.
Thank you, Pat. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for attending our webinar, Why Adaptive Security Architecture is the Future of Cybersecurity. A brief background about Empower Cybersecurity. The company was founded in the end of 2014. Our motto is to, rather than spend more, deploy smarter. You will see through the presentation today why we believe that your existing tools are currently trapped in silos that really limit their capabilities, and why you can make much more of what you already have. In order to do that, we have established a team coming from the cybersecurity experience for more than 20 years, with experience in developing network and endpoint security product, experience in security operations center and hacking. Our goal is really to shatter the conventional wisdom that you are more secure when you spend more, and we'll explain more about that. Our company invested heavily in technology. We have filed 9 patents, 1 already granted, and our solution has already been medium to large customers in North America. We're going to be in the RSA, in San Francisco, and of course we invite all of you to come and see the demo in our booth. In today's agenda, we will talk about the cybersecurity problem, how we defined it, a new concept in cybersecurity, a new solution concept, which we call security extraction. Then we will do a deep dive into the technology and summarize the value, and of course we'll provide enough time to answer your questions. So as I said, the principle that we would like to teach, that is more is not better. And Empower is all about giving the power to make more than the stuff you already have. Now the reason that the industry buy more and more security tools is obviously because in the recent years, the sophistication of the attack and the volume of the attack become significantly higher. As we see, attacks become much more prolonged, multi-stage, and multi-vector. Within each vector of the attack, there are hundreds, thousands of different attack techniques, from social engineering, penetration into the organization, and then different types of infection, propagation, and intrusion attempts that compromise the machine, eventually creating data leak or denial of service situation. And in response to that, the industry needed to invest in more and more security technologies. In medium to large organizations, there are more than 30 to 35 different security technologies, and within each one of these technologies, you can have hundreds of different sensors. It's firewall, intrusion detection and prevention system, network behavior analysis, the network, anti-network, anti-malware network platform on the endpoint as well. And in order to really be able to identify, investigate, and accurately mitigate these attacks or remediate, all these solutions are required to work in synchronization. But in reality, we know that most, if not all, the solutions today are delivered in non-integrated silos. These silos really limit their capabilities. Although some claiming that they can do it all, like one product, but the industry actually know that in reality, there are products that are good in one attack vectors, but are dysfunctional in another attack vector. So they complement each other, but they still need to work in sync. An attacker understood that, and if you look on again on the last 3 to 4 years, advanced attack were able to exploit these vulnerabilities, these silos of the security architecture that was established. All these organizations invested millions of dollars in very advanced security technologies, and still hackers were able to penetrate them. Gartner also talked about that. In the beginning of the year, Gartner released a very interesting report, Designing an Adaptive Security Architecture for Protecting Against Advanced Attack Campaigns. Now, this report, in high level, talk about the following problem, is that existing blocking and prevention capabilities are insufficient against motivated advanced attack. And more important, they explain that the detective, preventive, response, and predictive technologies from vendor have been delivered in non-integrated silos, as I mentioned before, and create a very bad situation in which they actually increase cost and decreasing effectiveness, really generating chaos where the industry needs much more clarity and collaborativeness where we need agility. So Gartner suggests in this interesting and very important report that the industry need to adopt an adaptive security architecture against these advanced attack threats, which means that all these protections need to be integrated well. Detective, preventive, predictive, and response capability must be integrated in order to break these silos. And of course, all of them should be context aware. So just to summarize the problem that we solve in Empower with security abstraction. In the recent years, because of the high frequency and volume of attack and sophistication of attack, the industry bought more and more solutions, which are potentially effective, but are really trapped in silos that limit their capability. And the result is a very complex security organization or security structure. The infrastructure becomes very heavy, non-adaptive, and inflexible. And this is the real reason why it takes too long to respond, identify, investigate, and eliminate the attacks. Because there were no real way to assign the right security tools, the right groups, the right. And it doesn't matter how much money and more people you would throw at the problem. You cannot scale. This view actually shows you that medium to large organization today cannot really scale, because if they want to have more and more solutions, because the network needs to scale, more security products need to be deployed, hardware, software, and services. They need to invest in more people, security analysts, security operations centers, and so on. And what happened is that security effectiveness is decreased because of this response chaos that was developed. With Empower, this is what you get. And we will explain throughout this presentation what you get with Empower, which is cybersecurity that is exponentially better than the sum of its parts. And the concept that will allow us to do it, as you will see, is the concept of security abstraction. The benefit of security abstraction and what it allows you to do, it allows you to design vendor-neutral cross-platform defense strategies. This is all about integrating your existing capabilities, existing security capabilities, in a vendor-agnostic way. And once this abstraction allows you to do it, the infrastructure immediately understands the intent of each attack techniques and each attack vector. Doesn't matter if it's old or a new one. Understanding intent, this is what when you're understanding the security intent, you can create instant correlation. That enables you to really connect the dots. All the data points, all the security data points much faster and in a more accurate way. That allows you better detection, investigation, and mitigation against advanced attack. Another interesting capability that security abstraction will show can allow you is to design vendor-agnostic defense model. And when I say vendor-agnostic, it means that it allows the community to create a true proactive and adaptive security architecture through collaboration. Because once you can create a defense strategy that is agnostic to the underlying security infrastructure, to the type of vendors, you can actually share this defense model and deploy it everywhere. So this is all about security abstraction and the definition of security particle. How abstraction solves it? We have developed a security platform, a software-based security platform that integrates with your existing network infrastructure, that includes network and endpoint security tools. And the technology that we have developed allows us to break your security tools down to their individual components, logical security components, what we call security particles. This technology allows us to break these tools into particles, and each particle meaning is a security intent, as you can see in the diagram. It doesn't matter which tool generates the log or which tool has a security rule in it. This particle represent the security intent of each rule and each log. It can be related to data leak, to pivot escalation, to password theft through spyware, and more different hundreds of security particles. And what we actually achieved by that is that we created an abstracted new layer that sits on top of your existing security tool and allow to turn what you already have into what you really need. So we created a language that can orchestrate all your internal capabilities based on security intent. You can call it a language of security intent. The form of security app, which is, as you see here, an orchestration model. There are investigation particles, detection particles, and mitigation particles. And on top of that model, we have developed an analytics engine, a security analytics engine, that reads the event that the model is generating, understand the intent of each event, and know how to correlate with the best available response in your network. So it actually reassembles the particle based on the development of the attack and create a new targeted security apparatus for each individual attack in your network and in real time. As I mentioned, there are particles that are responsible for detection, investigation, and also mitigation. So these are active particles. We'll see later on how we actually do that. To summarize that part, security abstraction, this is what we want to explain here, is that once you have it, you understand the intent. Once you understand the intent of the security, it allows you to make instant correlation and empower, turn your tools into an adaptive security architecture by doing that. And now another way to explain our abstraction space and the language of security intent is given in that diagram. What you see is this product. And of course, as I said before, when we talk about medium to large organizations and service providers, there are hundreds of different security products and different technologies. They're all generating a lot of data points that are related to their security rules and attack logs. And it creates a lot of confusion in the Security Operations Center, in the security IT organization. Our security platform uses advanced AI algorithm in order to classify these logs and rules automatically and map them to different intent groups. On the left side are defense capabilities. On the right side are the threat clusters. By providing this type of abstraction, which is agnostic to the vendors that you have, the security vendors, its correlation become much easier. Creating a very advanced defense strategy become much simpler and faster operation. So to summarize what we do, with our platform, we create a security abstraction, breaking up the tools into these security particles, then allow to orchestrate them to create a cross-product protection model, this defense strategy in the form of security app. Our analytics engine knows how to analyze the events that each one of the apps are generating, and in response, reassemble these particles to create a completely new apparatus against the attack. And then, when the risk is clear, the system knows how to find the available resources that can mitigate the attack or remediate the attack. To summarize the benefits of security abstraction, it creates a common language of intent, which allow you faster correlation and security analysis, a context-aware, comprehensive security, better orchestration by deploying the relevant defense particles, and shorter time to identify threats. And all of that will really provide you a nimble architecture, security architecture, an adaptive one against any type of attack that you can have in your network. It works for different types of very advanced campaign like ransomware, different types of financial data leak, pivot escalation, intelligence gathering, insider threat, and more. And by that, I would like to provide Anthony Farrer, our Senior Director of Solution Architecture, the lead, in order to show you how we actually do that.
Thank you, Avi. Just switching my screen over. So just mute the thing on the side so that you guys don't see just the WebEx thing. So I'll take you through the architecture of the product, really kind of following on from where Avi left off. Keep it relatively high level, but giving you really more information around the abstraction, around what that abstraction means in terms specifically from Empower, but realistically the massive benefits that actually provides. So let me take you through the kind of breakdown of our security hierarchy. So the software was really, the way it's built, as I mentioned, is a hierarchical system that allows not only the simplicity of breakdown from the actual security particles, as we mentioned earlier, into the different security OSs, but realistically, there's a whole wealth of management here. And it becomes obvious as we draw out the presentation. But realistically, from an orchestration platform, something that sits above other devices inside the network, it has to be simplistic in nature, both for deployment and realistically ongoing as you decide what's going on at the coalface, as I like to say, at the devices that are beneath us. So as your day-to-day devices are gathering event messages, creating events, scraping the network, so on and so forth, the system above it that's really tying all this together, the Empower architecture, has to be as seamless as possible, has to be as hands-free as possible. And we built a very hierarchical system to be able to achieve that. So I'll walk you through the model. I'll walk you through in terms of the security OSs, the abstraction layer, realistically how we piece that together from a security applications, and how those different security particles that make up that security application is fed to the risk chain from an analytics perspective. The interesting thing as well about what we define, as Abby pointed out earlier, as some of those advanced attacks, it's really the definition of those security applications. And I'll draw those out in terms of what makes up that security app. But actually, more importantly, and what we've had a lot of questions about is, can I make up my own definition of orchestration? And as a user, yes. Why? Because as Abby pointed out, we have that one common language that sits above the security OS that allows you to tie all of those orchestration pieces together. But likewise, one that's actually dynamic, not just in nature, but also in understanding intent. And intent is important in this case, and we'll go into why that is. And also classification of the capabilities of the devices, which actually is quite important, not just from a detection strength capability, but also from a kind of what actually this signature, what actually this function really means. So by being able to normalize that, the risk chain is fed with very precise, very idyllic information. We're under a static LED system, one that you have to define what each of those rules mean. Not only if the network changes underneath, also you have problems hierarchically. And the presentation will go through that. Likewise, in terms of mitigation, some of the decisions made for mitigation are important in terms of different mitigation rules for different circumstances. And the security OS level, because of the abstraction, because of the understanding and the intent, knows to choose the right tools for the right circumstances. So let me feed you into the model. Let me show you really what MPOW is all about. So from a plugin level, from the bottom of the software stack, it has to be as simple as possible. Why does it have to be simple? For multiple reasons, but realistically, as we, as vendors beneath us, change their systems, add to their API calls, add to their functionality, that has to be something that's both streamlined, simple to deploy, simple to implement. By doing that, by having what at the plugin level is very just a way of harvesting that information. How do I get to this device? How do I abstract, whether it's through a REST API interface, whether it's through screen scrapes, whatever the method is, the plugin level handles that. And it's dynamic in nature. So as we abstract that information, we pull it into our model. We define, as Abby mentioned earlier, we break down that security functionality, whether it's dynamic, whether it's something that can post. And what I mean by post is something like a database, like an IPS database. I can read the database in, we can analyze each of the signatures, and to give you an idea, when we analyze those signatures, we really break them down into, from a categorization, art categorization. What are the number of signatures? What are the age of the signatures? What is the manufacturer's severity level? What is the CVE, the external vulnerability exposure? Realistically, the number of hits and the accuracy level to each of these components. And importantly, we categorize them. So, I was on a call this week and somebody really asked, why do you categorize that? Why do you define what actually a rule is? If you think about the different manufacturers and different vendors, as they draw out their different rules, and say you have two products inside your network with identical classification, or what they claim as identical classification, as you draw out the rules, those actual rules can be used for different functions and functionality. And one good example was when I joined MPOW, I raised a bug because I saw this signature which actually looked like a privilege escalation. What it turned out to be was a Microsoft OS level, and the manufacturer was thinking of actually used those functionalities to combine what was privilege escalation. If you don't know the intent or the use of that signature, how in an abstraction model, how in an orchestration module, can you really determine and feed that analytics? So the breakdown of not only understanding the detection strength, the detection capability of each of the manufacturers, but also the usage, the intent, and obviously, what each of those events really mean. I gave you an example of a kind of a pre-processed one as a one in real time, something like a reputation service, something that's going to give us on demand a confidence level, the popularity of that attack, the age and the frequency. Those kind of real-time updates are fed into the middle layer, into the security OS layer, and if those security particles are needed, they're fed and updated the risk chain. So as we draw out these security particles, as I mentioned, say for example, a new vendor comes in, and that vendor in this case is Cisco SourceFire. I've already got McAfee, and he has new capabilities as new functionalities compared to the other vendor. In a case where you're really relying on understanding that event message, that's difficult to both add into the model. It's difficult as well to maintain that look from an abstraction layer. In this case, what it's doing is adding more features and functionality into the model. For example, as I said, SourceFire's come in, it's added the exfiltration patterns that are enabled, I've abstracted from the database, I've looked at the rules, determined the detection strength, determined their intent capability, fed it into our model. It's all done automatically without any user intervention. What you've done is the heavy lifting beneath you because you've decided to change, from one vendor to another, or you've upgraded the platform and a new series of event messages have come into the database. In that case, we're just harvesting that database, we're just classifying it all dynamically. If that functionality was needed at the Security OS risk chain level and an event actually triggers that, hey presto, your risk chain is now updated with our exfiltration pattern. This is done real time. This is done without any user interaction. And it's important because when you think about how before SIMs have really manually constructed or event messages or manually event messages constructed those event messages together, actually even deconstructing two different vendors' event messages is difficult. And knowing not only the intent around that event message, not only understanding what the detection strength is, but also a standard classification across the board enable us to be able to classify that dynamically. So in this case, as I mentioned, the database was updated. We've added new functionality, and they get added back into the abstraction layer. Now, once I have my breakdown of my security particles, actually, quite interesting enough, I have my security particles in my model. Whether the functionality beneath us is present or not, the selection of those determines that security apparatus, that application. As a user, you can define your own. We had a customer yesterday, and he just pointed out, I want to be able to look for insider attack. We have a bunch of advanced insider attack applications, which is a breakdown of those security particles. The one thing that he wanted to do as well was literally look for certain other aspects. So he said, well, what happens if I see a malware? If I see anything from malware, I want to be able to mitigate that straight away. The one thing that I just pointed out in the slide deck is that he was in the transition stage from switching from one vendor to another. His concern was, if I change the functionality, what happens above? And as I mentioned in our case, the definition of the security application, the definition of a ransomware or an insider attack, is the security particles from within our abstraction model. By changing the devices underneath, as long as they have the functionality that likes that, it doesn't break our logic in any way. It's a dynamic interface to the abstraction model. So as we draw out that abstraction model, as we draw out that one common language, as a user, we can then define our own. We can define our own through very strict or very loose correlation rules, through literally a playground of those applications. And it allows me as a user to say, right, if I see these type of attacks, if you see this definition, if I understand the intent behind it, I can create my own. Likewise, the model understands that. So I'll give you an example of intent aware. If, for example, we see a scan, a horizontal scan in the network. A horizontal scan has no meaning if it's just a bunch of scans. However, behind the horizontal scan, if there's a brute force attack that correlates the two together, not just am I seeing a bunch of event messages that match? If I see a port scan, does the actual brute force attack that's related to it, and how are they related? Is it the same source to destination? Are the perpetrators still attacking the same victim? Is the victim now where he was scanned on, say, port 21, is he now being forced through that brute force attack through 21? All that kind of realistic logic that you use as a human being is built into the model. So any of these correlation messages, any of the definition of a correlation is really feeding that engine. And as I say, you can really just drag and drop, define your own type of correlation events. However, as we mentioned, the definition of those advanced attacks, a lot of them are already created, but as a user, you have both flexibility. So as we draw out and understand what is, the analytics side, the risk chain part. So as I mentioned, the breakup of a makeup of the actually application level, those security OSs, the construction of those that make up those security OSs, is only definable because we understand the intent. As I mentioned earlier, the intent around the port scan, what realistically falls on that port scan. As a human being, you know what to look for, and we've built that logic inside of the engine. That is important for multiple reasons, because the definition of finding any part inside that attack cycle is not guaranteed to start at the beginning. I'm not guaranteed to start with social engineering, with some kind of probing. I could come at any point in the detection cycle. So, for example, if I understand, command and control, I understand the drilling out of command and control is now trying to get out to a website and download something. What is the intent behind that? I understand the intent, thus I know what to look for, both futuristic. I also know what to look for historic to guarantee it. So based on those series and types of events, based on those types of triggers to the functionality, we understand the intent behind each of those triggers. So we know exactly how to tie those segments together, tie those event messages together, but also investigate further. So investigation is a key to this, because like a human being, you're going to look for certain, or you're going to find certain messages. And certain messages are indicators of other things. Never, never 100% that it's one message equals one thing. In this case, in an advanced attack campaign, an individual attacker can start at any point with any type of tool inside his methodology, and his methodology will change. So why should the risk analytics be static? It has to understand the intent, and it has to understand the usage of each of those functions behind it. So as we draw out, we understand the intent, we understand the correlation of that event messaging. Likewise, actions behind that. When do I mitigate? How do I prevent these from happening? At what point in those cycles? And likewise, the actual mitigation engine is aware, like the investigation and the discovery mechanism, of what type of actions or what type of mitigation is required. To give you an example, we had a customer that said, if I have an attack between two hosts in the same network segment, I don't want the traffic to be managed or handled by the firewall, which is multiple switch hops away. In that case, quite simply, the top of the rack switch can mitigate that action because it's closest to the device and it's meaningful. If, for example, like a command and control C2 is drilling out to the website, you don't necessarily want to cut that host off by just doing a straight port 80 rule on a firewall or on a switch. As the customer said yesterday, that's our life, is port 80. We can't do that. So in that case, understanding the use of that command and control means I can write a regular expression to a firewall or a gateway firewall that understands the topology. We understand the topology, we understand the stream of traffic, and we can block that specific command and control so the host can function quite naturally. So understanding the intent, understanding the functioning capabilities in terms of the function capabilities of the attack cycle, we can not only apply the right detection and investigation phases, we can also apply, as we mentioned, the right mitigation phases as well. So what you kind of see in front of you is the breakdown of our dashboard, or part of our dashboard anyway. And I have one that looks like an octopus, so anyway, so I won't show you that one. So I'll take you through the icons on the left, as we call it, the layers, and realistically what's happening in the middle of the screen. So let me get my little marker pen. So what we have over here is we have what we call like our timeline. As the event is either in flux or the event is closed, you can wind the timeline backwards and forwards to see what's first discovered. It's actually quite important. What's the root of this? How have we detected this? These up here, and I'll mention what each of these segments actually go through. Each of these kind of little tick boxes allows us to look at multiple stages. One of these things actually here, the aggregated segmentation, is one of my favorites, especially from when you look at log files. If you think about looking at like an IPS log file, and you think out of like 1 million messages, there's something that's there's something that's meaningful. So to give you an idea, go back to my port scan methodology. If that host does a vertical scan or horizontal scan, actually, so say do a vertical scan, find a bunch of hosts, now do a horizontal scan to look for open port 21. So I scan about 20 machines. Now, one of those 20 machines, I find an open FTP server that I can try and drill into. I don't care particularly about the other 19 hosts. Why should I? I've just scanned it, it's irrelevant. But if I do a brute force attack through that 1 out of 20, I care about that one segment. So in this case, we'll have a segment. That segment will equal those type of attack data. And likewise, the other 19, I can literally limit. Let me put me that. Go back to my normal presentation, so I can just draw out these and show you what I mean. Oops. So here, as our segmentation identifies the different types of attacks, each one of these is a group of the different event messages that, as a user, you can right-click on. You can see the actions there was. In other words, what have I discovered on here? What have I learnt on that? And I can go to those actual specific event messages those manufacturers generated. Likewise, what has the device done to further the cause, further the investigation stage? So over here where we said investigation layer, the little circles, this segment part of the attack has determined that the detection strength of that has required an investigation. So the actions that it was captured, the segment that it's tied together, based on the intent of that, it's gone and investigated further. The reason why we put it as a circle on top of it is that investigation could have been weeks ago. I could have gone and discovered something that was a long time ago. So in the timeline perspective, it's hard to draw back and go back multiple weeks. So in this case, we show the timeline, the segmentation of the events as they're discovered, and then further investigation behind it. We show the mitigation layer. At what point in this case, what has been dropped? How it's been dropped? How is that managed? Number of bits and bytes against that rule that's been applied. Is the rule still in place in terms of, is the traffic still hitting those counters? We manage those, we manage that end to end. We don't just look and forget. We place, we apply the rules, and we manage those rules. So we're aware of what's going on inside the network. I mentioned the aggregation, I mentioned the mitigation, and predictive layer, futuristic in terms of if you start to see patterns and other things, we can start to draw those out and be realistic of what's happening in the future. The ones, the groups that you see down here, you can even start to filter on the different types of segmentation to show, I just want to see command and control. This screen that you see, this attack number 2 here, is literally the breakdown of one single event inside Empower. We may have clustered all these events together to show the segmentation, the type of attack metadata. You can click here, the button up here. You can click the network tap button to say, I want to see it from a host perspective. But likewise, this is one event message. This is important. I can see the events around that single event. This is not 1,000,001 events like what I see inside my IPS or other devices. So let me clear my drawings on the screen. So what did I mention earlier in terms of defining or actually having those different security apparatus, gathering together those security particles? So in MPOW, what we brought out this app store. Literally, you can click on the app store, you can click on the type of advanced attacks that you want to defend against, and it's going to download that definition of the security particles. So in other words, I need X and Y and Z security particles for insider threat, for ransomware, for so on. So it's going to gather those security particles together that it requires for that defense, for that mitigation, for those investigation stages. As you see the little red triangle, let me drill onto the next slide. What's important is that as it constructs those security particles, it actually shows you not only from a definition of what's missing, maybe from a functionality, but also from a configuration. So what you see in front of you is our playground. Our playground really is the abstraction, those security particles that are gathered here on the left and are constructed here in the middle, both for the detection phase, the investigation, and the mitigation phase. What I need, what functions I need to be triggered to be able to define what is, or at least discover what is, some type of advanced attack campaign. So the application is a bunch of these configurations, these detection phases, these investigation phases, and mitigation, and we're tying those together, triggered by the event messages as they come into the appliance. This actual showing the definition or showing the missing functionality, or whether the events are actually enabled or events, in this case the signatures are enabled or disabled, is important. Because in this case, you're like, I thought I was defending against, but this is showing me that I'm missing that. The definition of a playground may be defined by MPAL, but it can also be very simply defined by you. Create an application of your own, and then drag and drop those functionalities into it. Some people have even used it for seeing what's missing inside their network in terms of configuration, in terms of functionality. So just to give you a very brief look of one of our slides in terms of supported products. We've started with what are classed as the best in breed in terms of appliances out there. We have these quite regularly. We have in R&D an actual separate team that's dedicated or devoted to applying these. As I mentioned early on in the presentation, the abstraction is one level. The actual plugin to support these types of devices is very simplistic in nature and allows us to be able to roll out new devices pretty quick. So in other words, I need a new X and Y. I need a new anti-malware service or a new IPS. In that case, we've already defined what that function is at that security OS layer. So the abstraction of that, how I take it from that appliance, is really the plugin. Very simplistic in nature, allows us to roll out any new vendors extremely quickly. And it's important. As I mentioned, we've built a very agile, simplistic model that allows beneath us to change, chop and change, while simplistically bringing in new devices or new configurations dynamically and simplistically. And this allows us to do that. But as I mentioned, here's a list of kind of supported products. One thing that I am interested in, or more interested in, is the customer voice behind this. So to give you an idea, this customer, we went live around about this time last year. He initially was looking at two different things. One thing was actually breaking down the amount of event data that's inside his network. And we literally took the 1.2 million IDS, IPS events over a 24-hour period and broke it down into 3,000 of real security events, realistically looking at the build-up or the campaign of an advanced attack. So looking at tying those segments together to really prove what was going on and really kind of boil down all those event messages that are being triggered by that IPS. Providing, in this case, eyes and ears of what a SOC kind of functionality is doing. It's giving you that human response, that human kind of discovery look and feel. He also was very interested in kind of real-time mitigation threats. So he wanted to see how being able to manage certain types of threats inside his network dynamically and for us to manage those. So that was one of the challenges that he wanted us to prove. We went through that exercise. We showed in terms of different, in his case, we could tweak or have a certain threshold level to mitigation. Those threshold levels are both in an event and in a segmentation, as I mentioned earlier, and that allows him to be able to kind of control his mitigation or his desire to when to mitigate and when to kind of control those. So for them, the benefits were identical, or at least the benefits were obvious day one. Boiling down those alarms, those events messages, tying them to real security event messages in terms of real attack cycles, and also how to control the mitigation, how to control that inside his network. But that was 12 months ago today, giving a good idea. So the voice of the customer in terms of Empow's definition is it's a unique platform, one that realistically with that abstraction layer allows us to be able to realistically boil down the usage of each of the devices, which in turn gives us a realistic capability of understanding the intent and understanding an attack cycle. And whether those are different vendors that are picking up on those, or different vendors of different strengths in terms of detection strength, that allows us to be able to tie those event messages and understand that meaningfully. And what I mean by meaningfully is realistically in terms of, does that vendor have the detection strength? Is that realistic an event that can be tied to another event, or is it a silo case that can be ignored? We understand the intent, we understand the detection strength, and we can tie all that together. So the power of, as mentioned, the power of Empow, realistically, from not just the automation part of it, not just the abstraction, obviously, the real-time mitigation strengths as well, and unlocking that power of the SOC, unlocking those eyes and ears to be able to look further at the existing event messages that are being correlated across the network, which are not ones and twos, these are thousands or millions of event messages per day, and being able to boil those down into realistic, providing that insight, providing that visibility into those tools that are generating that amount of information. And the more tools we know that we add to the network, the worse, the more compound the effort is. So it's not just adding more eyes and ears, it's adding eyes and ears across those multi-platforms for correlation. Because we know, as I mentioned earlier, attack types are not just going to be attack campaigns, attack types are not just a single vector. As an attacker, you're going to use whatever methods and methodology you can to unlock that, whatever my intent is. In case of a malware, in case of an insider attack, I'm going to use different tools. Or in my arsenal, I don't expect the different products out there, a single product, to actually identify all of those in itself. Thus, I'm evading that detection strength unless you can look across those different fields. So Mpower provides that strength and that visibility across those multiple platforms. We're at RSA, just as a switching gears. We're at RSA 2017. We have a booth. There's our booth number. And I think somebody else from Mpower would like to give any more pointers in terms of what it is for RSA.
Yeah, so we'll be out at RSA from February 13th through the 17th. We're in the South Hall, booth 2827. If anyone is out there, we'd love to set up time to come by, do a demo of the product. If you're not going to RSA, we'd be happy to let us know, myself or Anthony. This is Pat Clark, VP of Sales and Biz Dev, that's talking. We can do a one-on-one demo if you'd like to see this platform in action. So we can arrange that, or we can certainly do it RSA if you're out there. Now, if there's any questions, we could take some questions now. Well, the team is all here. You could either do it through the question board, or I can kind of unmute. I'm not sure how to unmute everybody. I guess the best way to do would put in your questions through the question panel, and then we'll answer it. Okay, I'm not seeing anybody with any questions. Okay, we're going to be sending out a follow-up email to this event. You'll be getting that later today and tomorrow. Feel free to reach out and contact us if you would like a follow-up by any of the Mpower team. And we want to thank you for attending today's webinar and hope you found it very interesting. Thank you.
Reduce the cost of management through